and thanks so much for tuning in to the Scaling People podcast. I'm your host, Rasika Rajagopalan, and today I am so glad to be chatting with Cara Allamano, former CPO of Lattice. Cara has seen it all, previously serving as the HR leader at companies like Udemy, Planet, Pinterest, and Adobe, particularly through times of change, whether that be while the company was going public, managing an acquisition, or navigating a significant point of transition. She's also such a connector, founding organizations like People Tech Partners that have brought HR leaders and HR tech products together. So, Cara, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you. Super happy to be here. Love talking to other great HR leaders.
Love it. Love it. Well, let's get into it. So, given your background, I thought we could dive into this concept of wartime versus peacetime CPO leadership. We often hear that used for CEOs, but as you've lived firsthand, our roles shift pretty dramatically based on the state of the world and the company. And so I'm curious how you define wartime as a chief people officer. Is it strictly about layoffs and restructuring, or are there other challenges that put you in that mode?
Well, I think layoffs and restructuring can definitely be considered a wartime activity. But, have been doing this for 25 years. And wartime is anytime your company is in a transition where the people need to be brought along. It's anytime your company is facing a challenge. It's anytime something new and amazing happens to your company. So what's interesting is that for a CEO, wartime usually means challenge. I've got to come up with a new strategic outcome. I have to fix something. For a CPO, wartime means good news, bad news, because no matter what, as we know internally, as people leaders, really positive, aggressive growth is a wartime mentality as well, meaning that could be for Sarah sitting in the corner, it could be the best thing that happens to her because she sees a new growth path ahead of her. But for someone else in a different part of the company, something like existential growth for the business, which most people would think is definitely peacetime, could also mean layering and change and really strong evolution of jobs in the same way, and can have the same critical impact as a layoff for a team where you've lost members of your team and you have to restructure internally. So for better or for worse, I think on the people side, we actually live much more in that wartime mode. And now that we've had a lot of changes externally with COVID, with economic environment, the strategic impacts to our business have multiplied those effects.
Yeah, totally. I love the way you kind of touch on this idea of growth mindset. A lot of times, I think those are the moments, the challenging moments that are the character building ones where you're able to kind of seek out the opportunity in the chaos. And I think the CPO can play a really important role in driving that message and, offering that opportunity. I'm curious what the biggest shift is in your approach when moving from a peacetime to a wartime role. Like what priorities kind of shift to the forefront for you and how do you mentally adjust or prepare for that transition?
Well, I think it's really important for me to have, as a leader myself, to have full context and to sit in my own space and understand and be aligned with the reasons we're making this choice to move into an accelerated wartime type mode. And the context is so critical because that's what I can bring back to my people team to help them have the full context, because those are the folks, those are the soldiers on the ground, right? Those are the generals on the field. And if you're doing your job as a CPO leader, so much of your work is in the framing and in the storytelling and in the full context. And our job is actually to bring what is often our superpower, which is empathy, to the table and understanding what context needs to be provided, what story needs to be told, what reasoning needs to be shared across the organization, at what levels, to help people move through these changes. And we have the privilege of doing that. But if you're asking, like, what is my number one? How do I approach that day one? It's helping me get right in that understanding so that I can clearly articulate that and I can help lead through that kind of change. Because the board level, at the CEO level, their job is to make the decision and to articulate the decision. And then our job is to mobilize behind it.
Yeah.
And to activate.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think kind of the most challenging aspect of being a wartime people leader is a lot of times, like, we look at metrics like ENPS, morale, engagement, as sort of like health metrics around our organization. A lot of the decisions you have to make in a wartime environment, they are necessary for the business, but sometimes they do affect those other metrics that,
And by the way, they should.
right.
They should affect that. This might be a tangent, but you've probably seen it as well. I get worried if we're in a place where EMPS or engagement is high and we are in there is a significant shift that is happening across the org, or that you're trying to change
Hmm.
across the org, because what that can also mean is that people are not hearing you. People aren't understanding the significant impact to their role, to their part of the business, that there is a disconnect. So I love that you bring up the data. I think data should always inform your decision making. I think we're lucky because these days we have tools that can give us that data. And if we don't, then it's our job to bring those tools into orgs and build up that as a key competency. But I've talked to a number of CPOs in the past 2 years, and I think a lot of people whose careers were elevated to CPO or leadership level in the last 7 years. That's a hard time,
Hmm.
right? Because you were going from most likely an individual contributor or a small team up to leading in a time where everything was great and then it was terrible,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
And that you didn't get the opportunity to learn through medium
Hmm.
and make mistakes. Everything felt really high stakes. So I had conversation with folks that said our EMPS last year was X and now it's this. Isn't that awful and terrible and
Hmm.
brutal? And the other piece of that is we have a lot of CPOs taking on that guilt, taking on that accountability. And what I'll say is this is part of the life cycle of a company.
Hmm.
And it's part of what we can say. And part of the context is this will impact our MPS. This will be hard for our teams. This will feel different. And here, the best thing we can do on the people side is have a plan, but to reflect back to the org that you're not going to see those numbers.
Hmm.
And by the way, that's not a direct measurement of the work of a CPO or a people leader. That's a measurement of where your org is in terms of sentiment, of terms of understanding. And sometimes that's where they should be.
Yeah.
If things aren't good, you should not be at 100%.
Totally, totally. Yeah, I think a lot of times as a people leader, you want to protect the culture from fracturing during these
Yes.
moments. But I completely agree. I think sometimes some of that interim fracturing, it's not necessarily like a failure. It's acknowledging too that the culture evolves, especially in challenging times, and that, your own sort of notion of what innovation meant at your company is completely different now, or like constraints sometimes bring out a lot of creativity, and just kind of navigating those challenges with your team, I think can really help you come out stronger. And you do have to sort of observe and go through that hit in the short term. I'm curious, you talk a lot about communication and trust. And so what are the most effective communication strategies for maintaining trust and clarity when you're making those difficult decisions? And how do you ensure that your messages resonate with employees at all levels?
For me, it's really spending time in the one-on-one conversations to listen, to understand, and to test out the messaging. It is really having connections with folks in different parts of your org. And also, I've been really lucky to have amazing people on the people teams that I've had. And I've been really clear that their job is to share feedback about where people are in different parts of the
Mhm.
org. And then it's my job to make sure that if we have a red flag in a corner of the org that we feel like is really disconnected from the rest of where other folks are, or is moving in a direction that will lead to disconnection, my job is to highlight that and to bring it back and to take it and to escalate it and elevate it, and then work with my leaders, work with the people team to make sure that we're being open, transparent, and thoughtful about how we're responding to those things. I also want to flip this too. You can also have parts of your org that are just killing it with communication and figuring this out, that have a different level of resilience than others. And I'll tell you, sometimes those folks are, my go to market
Mhm.
teams. I've been pleasantly surprised at times how customer success groups. These are folks that have had to build resilience muscles over the course of their careers. So when they hear a message about mobilizing the business, about shifting and changing, sometimes those are the folks that are first to adopt and shift and then move into action. So I always also like to ask the question, where are things going well within the org? Where are things happening that who are the leaders and what are the words, literally the words they're using that are helping people move through the change curve, that are getting to impact, and where are people feeling motivated and engaged? Both red flags and green flags are what we need.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. I think it helps you kind of identify your champions as well. I think the more we can kind of also leverage our own team to sort of be those champions and share those wins and, kind of light that beacon of hope. I think that's very motivating. So I love that example. I think one challenge that I see too is when wartime kind of drags on a little longer than anticipated. Sometimes the initial messages like, we got to buckle down, the next few months are going to be hard. And sometimes that can go on for years. And so I'm just curious how you avoid burnout, both for yourself and for the people around you, or how you like to think about that.
I think there are a couple things. And part of this is that you will be in wartime for years if you're building a sustainable business that will be successful. And that's a really important lesson that I learned. I've now had 5 companies that have become sustainable public companies that I've had the privilege of helping to build people functions in. And the stories we tell ourselves in Silicon Valley about 0 to 1,000 and everything's up and to the right, there are moments in time and there are moments of companies that have experienced that. But even, anybody who knows anybody at Google or Facebook or, Pinterest, yes, from the outside, it just looked like up and to the right every single day. And wow, isn't that a super exciting journey? And you tell yourself, wow, that looks pretty glamorous. And you look at folks on LinkedIn and you're like, wow, that another promotion, amazing. What we do is really hard. And part of this is Anna Bender at Asana. She's CHRO over there. She's amazing. She's been there for years. She was MuleSoft before that. Anna is a friend of mine, and she talked to me about the concept of type 2 fun. Type 1 fun is, honey, we're going out on a Saturday night. Put on your heels. Like, this is going to be great. Everybody knows type 1 fun. Type 2 fun is, we're going to go climb that mountain. We're going to hate it. It's going to be awful. But quite literally, like when we see sunrise at the top of a freaking mountain, and we're one of the, small subset of humans that have done that, like that kind of fun that is very special, is amazing, and it's quite literally what humans are meant to experience. And a lot of times, outside in our personal lives and a lot of times professionally, we've told ourselves and we've taught ourselves that fun and goodness is type 1 fun, and that's the only thing. And the type 2 fun is quite literally, my type 2 fun was when I was standing at NASDAQ ringing the bell when Udemy went public, and you have all these people that you were in the trenches with, and you have your founders standing, 2 people away from you, and you have all your customers that were, your customer stories behind you. Like, we changed lives. Like, what we did in the world had a real impact. But the story behind that story was a lot of long nights, effort, deep work. And I think part of it is really important for us as CPOs. And that's what I've tried to do with my teams. Like, by the way, this is what winning feels like. Winning feels like change. Winning feels like adjustment. If we weren't doing these things, we would be that company that's going out of business because they didn't adjust, they didn't change, they didn't look at their strategy and have courage to make that shift. And I'm not blaming people. People go out of business for lots of different reasons, and you can really bust everything that you've got and still have a company that doesn't get where it wants to go. but fundamentally framing around understanding that it is a hard job you're being asked to do. Yes, there's amazing win at the end, and winning is in the change. It is the wartime, and finding meaning in that part, I think, is the really important messaging.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think I heard a product leader once share that, you see a lot of the companies that kind of become these unicorn companies in like 4 months, like how complex is the product really? It's there's like a level of, obviously things that are simple sometimes make the most sense and last, but then there's this other sort of side of it, which is like the things that are most complex are the hardest to replicate and are really kind of differentiated in the value that they provide. And so I think you're so right. A lot of these success stories, there are a lot of these moments that we're not seeing because we're not maybe privy to the level of complexity behind the problems that they solve. And it's actually the beauty and the simplicity of the solution, but deep kind of down layered underneath that is a lot of complexity and a lot of nuance, and that shows up in the sort of stages that you experience through the company's growth. So on that note, I'm curious how you sort of balance the immediate wartime crisis maybe needs with the long-term vision for your people strategy or your company strategy. Like how do you kind of keep that strategic lens when everyone's like in it, and kind of in the weeds and trying to sort of put out those fires and make it to tomorrow?
Yeah. To get tactical, what I have learned is the foundations of what we do on the people side of business are still critical. And it might be, and I say that and I mean it very crisply and clearly. This is having regular feedback cycles, having a compensation philosophy that makes sense and that aligns with your business strategy, having a talent strategy in terms of location. Are we remote first? Are we hybrid? Like, everybody can have an opinion about that. But as a people leader, this is a strategy and it needs to be aligned with where your business is and where your talent is. You need to have talent reviews. You need to have calibrations. You need to have succession planning. And when you don't have these things, what it means is you don't have the data, and then you're not able to assess whether the decisions that you're making in those moments of crisis, in those wartime crisis, are good decisions or bad decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So I have, in every role I've come into, really looked at those foundational pieces and spent time going back to basics. Because what we do may seem simple. We just have to, motivate an entire org and help people do their
Piece
best
of
work.
cake.
Piece of cake. But it's not easy. And in the same way that the foundational, the tried and true methods that have worked in every other function are critical and important, it's for us.
Mm-hmm.
It's for us on the people team. And so when you look at our partners in law, on the legal team, when you look at our partners in G&A, on finance and accounting, it's they're not making the case that the foundational pieces are important for them because they have regulatory environments that they exist within.
Mm-hmm.
We get a choice, for better or for worse, as people leaders. We aren't compelled by regulatory environments to have regular feedback processes. We aren't compelled to have a really tight aligned compensation strategy. We aren't required to do it a certain way with hybrid in office. There's a lot of things here that we can skip over and fly over and not do well without a ton of external or de facto fallout. But the fallout comes to us.
Mm-hmm.
This is why people leaders don't succeed. This is why we don't have credibility. This is why we fall down when we're, called to accountability by boards of directors. And I did that a few times and decided I didn't want to do it anymore. I wanted to be able to stand and have the same strong foundation that my CFOs had, that my GCs had, that the heads of my other departments had. I wanted to have benchmarks that I could stand behind and aligned with.
Mm-hmm.
All those things helped me from a table stakes perspective, build credibility in my role and for my team, so that, again, when you're asked to make tough decisions, you're like, I know this is the right decision because the data says it's the right decision. And from a benchmark perspective and experience, I have all this context from the right processes and practices that I've established here on the people team.
Yeah.
Now, you're right in that if you're living in a crisis mode all the time, or you are under resourced, that is harder. But part of me said, and so it takes longer. In a perfect world, you might set up a whole new cycle in the first 6 months. What I say is get it on to people roadmap, know what your priorities are, knock things out as you go, because every brick that you're building that foundation is making you stronger as a leader and you stronger as a people team member. And I quite literally, like, I will take on no additional initiatives, projects, ideas, input from other executives, from board, until I know that my foundations are in place, because the only thing that does is erode my ability as a leader to lead, to have credibility in my role and have the credibility of the people team that's going to take that we're going to require to get things done for our business.
Yeah, yeah. I really appreciate sharing that story because I think it also shows how, you've grown as a leader through some of the
Yes.
challenges that you've experienced. And kind of switching gears to your role in co-founding People Tech Partners, I think that's been such an incredible resource for other people, leaders, to learn from each other, share resources. There weren't always forums like that to do that. And I think they've been really game changing. And so I wanted to ask you, what inspired you to start People Tech Partners? And as a kind of second part to that question, are there certain sort of HR tools or resources that you're really kind of hoping will be built and shared as we kind of think about the next set of challenges ahead of us?
Yeah, I mean, the reason I founded People Tech Partners with my partner Robbie Peters was probably the reason a lot of things happen in life is I was pissed off. I was frustrated because I looked around. I was being asked, I found it about 10 years ago, and we were being asked to do more and more and more. And, you just heard me talk about the importance of the foundations that we build. The foundations are built with good tools. Like, you need the hammer, you need the nails, you need all these things. And we had nothing. I mean, God bless, we have Success Factors, Workday, ADP. And for me, and in Silicon Valley, sitting here and seeing a proliferation of amazing tools in everybody else's pocket, and then being asked to go into a boardroom and have a presentation or explain why we needed to do XYZ for the workforce, it did become a conversation where I sounded like everything I was based on opinion or feeling, which are really critical pieces of context when you're trying to be persuasive and have impact, as a department and as a leader, but it's not
Right.
enough. It's definitely not enough. So I started having conversations with founders. The word must have gotten out because I had some folks, and including Jack Altman, who is founder of CEO of Lattice, reach out that I was out interested in having conversations about people tools and what was happening and what we needed. And then, and what I was learning was we had a lot of really amazing engineers and other folks that were spinning out of their companies that had had a challenging experience one way or another as an employee or as a leader, and wanted to fill a gap. They had amazing ideas, but they were dying on the vine. And these new startups were dying. The new startups in the category that we had just coined future of work were dying because they'd go to venture capital firms and they would be told, like, why do I care about mental wellness of an employee base? Well, what we know now is Spring Health, which is a People Tech Partners company, is now multi-billion-dollar unicorn, maybe a public company in the next few
Yeah.
years. Why do I care about fertility? Carrot is one of our companies. Why do I care about performance management cycles? Right? Last on the list of somebody who's a venture capitalist, who's a gatekeeper at a firm of 20 people, whose one job is to decide where to put money. And I don't blame the VCs, because we were not speaking up as customers, in my opinion. We weren't demanding better. And it was a new category for the most part,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what we did is I just got together. I actually used it as a point in time to quite literally email some of my. I was a fangirl of a lot of CPOs. You look out there and you're like, these people are so smart and amazing and building super awesome companies. So some were friends and some were friends of friends, and reached out and said, hey, I want to do this thing where we get together and we are voice of customer for these folks, and we pilot and we tell them what they're doing well and what they're not doing well. And I want to be real, like HR leaders, we're a different buyer than most other SaaS buyers. I've got a tech stack, of 30 to 40 different tools. I'm not sitting on top of a Salesforce where it's like one cell. I just need to go deep on features and make a case there. I'm over the course of my day, I'm sure you're doing the same thing in your head of role, and you're like, 1 minute I'm in my compensation tool caring about a compensation cycle or a promo request or something. The next minute I'm caring about somebody's performance feedback. The next minute I'm like, somebody didn't get their dental coverage in the way they want it. So we are all over the place in terms of the different tools, and each one has to solve a problem end to
Mm-hmm.
end. So being able to be that voice of the customer, getting to these companies and being a partner to them very early in their cycle, series seed or A, it started working. And the beauty of what they were able to do is get pilots with some of these folks that were in amazing companies,
Mm-hmm.
Slack and Amada Health and Pinterest and Planet, where I was, so that by the time they did go and say, we think we have a thing, they were able to go to a venture capital firm with logos as a proof of concept and get funded. So that was the reason People Tech Partners started. It's why we still exist. We have a group of 250 people leaders like you, and we don't want to grow bigger than that. We have folks move in and out over the course of their work. And what we do is we have 4 companies a quarter that come through, and we give them really honest Shark Tank style feedback on what they're doing well and what they can improve on as they're building their businesses. And we take them on as pilots. We serve as advisors to them. Folks within our group become equity advisors directly to companies and are there for the longer journey. And it's something, people are like, how did you do this? How did you think about it? It's a side thing. It's a labor of love. It's, as you said, a community that goes beyond just trying to solve for tools. We really help each other and support each other. I've got a bat phone. I can call any of these folks on, and they'll help us out. But what it's really shown is what happens when you get a bunch of HR folks together to solve a problem.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love this. I love this story. I think it really highlights something that I observed kind of early in the pandemic, which was, I think during the pandemic there was kind of this acknowledgement that work is changing, and so we need more remote work tools. And I think initially a lot of the discussion, especially at the sort of VC level, and a lot of the founders that were kind of building tools that maybe weren't kind of in the HR space previously, a lot of it was around engagement and building culture, which is very important. But I think that there was like a whole other side to the world that maybe you don't see if you're not in HR, which is like now you're hiring people in like 10 countries when you're still like a 10-person company, or like the gig economy and the way that's kind of changed the way that people, earn money and work. Like there's just all these other like tactical aspects that you just don't see. And so I think, in that sense, you're able to, with People Tech Partners, really kind of bring to life the problems and the challenges that people leaders are facing daily, and ensure that solutions are built so that we can continue to kind of scale the impact of the work that we do. But so thankful. And I think the best kinds of things just take a life of their own, because there's such a need for it. They exist, they need to exist. And so it's great that you kind of found that opportunity. But
I also think it's hilarious that now, a couple years into the pandemic, as you were saying, we became center stage. And part of it was the rise of our profession, which I think is so important. But it's hilarious to me that what we do, future of work is sexy now,
Mm-hmm,
and I'll take
mm-hmm,
it.
mm-hmm,
I'll take it because this is my life's work. And a couple things that I think about. One is what we do is really important. People spend 80% of their time at work, most people
mm-hmm.
globally, right? So I've been in a lot of companies, those of us in startups who sort of give up a traditional career path to go into this mode. Most of us do it because there is a calling and a want to change the world, right? I think about it. If you're going to change the world of work.
Mm-hmm.
This is how people experience their lives, is through the programs, the practices, the processes that we as people leaders bring to the table. And so I take that responsibility. It's dear to my heart. We are stewards of people's life experience. And if we're going to be able to do our jobs well, we're going to have tools. And the tools that save me, a half an hour in my day, that allows me to go talk to somebody and find out what's happening in the org, or allows me to spend more time on strategic stuff, like that's a game changer. That's important.
Yeah. Couldn't have said it better myself. Cara, I just really appreciate you taking time to come on the show. You have such a wealth of knowledge, and I'm so grateful for the community that you've built and all the learnings that you're able to share with us today. So thanks again, and until next time.
Until next time. And thank you. Your voice is really important, and these conversations, I think, are really critical.